So now we're going to see a demonstration of some of the problems that you could encounter when doing your database migration. So here we have the Access database that we're going to upgrade. And I have a few queries that we're going to use later. But what we want to do is we want to get these into SQL Server. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into SQL Server and I'm going to bring in this students table first. We have the database, the blank database. There's no tables in here other than the system tables. And it's in the other window here. Data source is Ace OLEDB. I think we can still destination, we want to make sure you're going to SQL Server native client. Next, we're going to copy from one or more tables or views. And so let's just bring in the students table first. And okay, so we see we have some problems here. Probably it's going to be a date format. Data value overflow the specified type. That's basically the same idea as invalid date format. Let's go ahead and close this. And let's take a look at the Access database. And it was table students. And okay, so we see a problem here. Now we have some malformed dates here. 9/1/2019. These are enrollment dates. Now that's a valid year. I mean, the valid date. There was a year 2019, but SQL Server is saying no, this can't be right. Now it looks like the person entering the data meant 2019. I think there might be some others here, or maybe not. Well, this one, okay. 220, probably 2020. This 2029 probably, probably entered 29 was the one that was entered, and that became, yeah, so let's just make that one 2019 as well. This one too. Those would be valid. I don't think those would cause errors, but we might as well fix those anyway. Okay, so we're going to close this. And now let's try doing this import again. And let's just bring it, let's do students by itself again. Okay, see, this time it works. Great. So that's one thing that we could end up having an issue with. Let's go ahead and, as long as we're at it, let's import the remaining tables. So we got to do the same process again. Let's bring in colors, majors, people colors, favorite colors, right? Several students can have several favorite colors, so it's a many-to-many relationship. We've already brought in 2 students, so we won't do that again. And this should all work. It looks like it did. Okay, great. Okay, so that shows the first issue, which could be improperly formatted dates. I found that that's the most common pitfall by far of all the issues you can have when importing data. So I want to show one more issue that we have. And so, again, these 4 tables and these 4 tables are the same. The only difference is with these 4, we imported these into SQL Server. Then we linked these tables to those tables that we just imported. So in other words, you see the icon, the globe icon. That means these are not local tables. These are simply links to the SQL Server table. If you go to the students and these queries, So this is a student query. You see we're able to add a student here. This is a query made from the linked tables. And as soon as we go in this, we're going to see an issue here that I can't add any records. Let's go in here to see the difference. I'm able to, you have this little star, you have this extra row, which means I can add a record. That record doesn't exist here. Now I can edit records, but I can't add them. There's a couple of problems here that we need to address. First of all, I need to add the student ID to this table. This wouldn't work even in Access, because the student ID, if I don't enter a student ID, Access will assume it's null, and we can't have any null values. We can't have any empty values for student ID. That alone, however, doesn't fix it. There's another problem, in that the join key, in this case the major ID, has to be in this table, in this query. Once we do that, now we find that we can add records and there shouldn't be any issue. Let's put Mr. Gretzky into Jedi Sciences. See, there's no problem now. Once we have the data imported, I want to show you one other issue we have with the students table. So we're going to have an issue here. These records were already in, but I added this new record to the students table, and I'm going to click off it just to make sure it's saved, and I'll click back on it, and watch what happens. I'm going to change this the first name, right? And I get this interesting error here. It says write conflict. Now, we did a whole video on this, so I'm just going to kind of do an overview here. It looks really weird. This record has been changed by another user since you started editing it. If you save the record, you overwrite the changes. Now, this seems to suggest that this error message is very misleading, in that it seems to suggest that there's another user using this database and editing that record at the same time. Well, that's not actually the case. I'm just going to click drop changes. There's nothing for it. I can't do save record, so I'll just go ahead and drop. Now, I don't have that issue. Interestingly enough, the other records, I don't have that issue. No problem here. So so that makes him kind of strange. Why would I get that error? I mean, and I assure you, no one else is in this database. It's the Access file and the SQL database are on the local machine that I'm working on. So I know that there's no one else using it. So here's where the issue lies. So I'm going back into the back end, into SQL Server, and we're going to go to the design of this table, and we're going to immediately see what the problem is. And this is something I mentioned in the PowerPoint, that when you have a yes/no data type, now SQL Server calls it a bit, whereas Access calls it a yes/no, but it's basically the same thing. It's a data type, it's a data column that has two possible values: true, false, yes, no, etc. And there is an allow nulls in here. So when I entered that new record, I didn't enter anything for the active column. I didn't enter anything from here. So it entered a null value. Now, Access, when this is just an Access table, let's go back to the Access for a moment. And let's go into the local copy of table students. Now, I have to go back in here, and I want to make sure that, okay, it doesn't make, all right. I'm going to go back into the Access table here, and I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to just add, I'm not going to enter anything there. Now, when I want to change this, when I want to change it here, now there's no problem. Because Access will not give a null value. Access, if you don't enter any value, in this column, Access will interpret it as false by default. So it just assumes that Willie Williamson is not active. Whereas, if we go to this is the linked version. Whereas, by not entering anything here, I basically entered a null value. So there's two problems. We don't want to have this as a null value, and we don't want to allow null values. We want to make sure we have a default in there. So the remedy is to not allow nulls, but if we're going to do that, we also have to make a default value. So I'm going to make sure. Maybe we should actually make it active by default. You think? I don't know, 6 of one, half a dozen of the other. Let's make it default. In Access, -1 is default. In SQL Server, +1 is default. So I'm going to make 1 the default value. So let's save this. Save the table here. Oh, we have an existing value. Okay. I may need to. I don't want to do it here. Okay. Let's just go ahead and see. And that's the problem. You have a null value in here. And I can't. I just said, well, don't allow null values in here, but there's a pre-existing null value in here. So SQL Server is not going to make this non-nullable. So let's just give this a value. So we don't have to worry about that. And now it should let us save. Okay, there we go. All right, so now by default, it's going to make an active value, and so it's going to make. It's going to make the active true. So let's go ahead and close all this, and we'll go back into the Access database. I'm going to close this table. I'm going to refresh it, but now we can go into this table. See, and now there's no issue. So that problem was fixed because we had to make sure two things. That in the SQL table, the value for that, oh, I closed it, open it again, that this bit field has to not allow nulls. It also has to have a default value. So if we go back in, let's enter a new one. And just, I do have to put in an ID. You see, it checked that by default. This checkbox automatically checked. I didn't do anything. And that's because the underlying database now has a default value of true. So hopefully this demonstrated to you some of the needs in which you would need to upgrade from Access to SQL Server, but also showed you some of the pitfalls and things you have to be aware of when doing so. So SQL Server is a great tool. We generally recommend it for anything but the smallest databases, but there are things you do have to keep in mind. And our intention in this video was to illustrate those potential pitfalls. So hopefully you found this informative and entertaining. Please remember to like and subscribe to our channel. Again, thank you for watching, and have a great day.